So thanks for joining us, and I am now honored to welcome Danielle Russo, who is presenting hashtag Final Notice, STEAM Curriculum Confronting Climate Change. Thanks, Danielle.
Thank you so much, Missy, and thank you so much for having me and for everybody at the Institute of Performing Arts at Rochester University. I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen. So just bear with me for one moment. Oops, that's not what I wanted to do. I wanted to do this. There we go. Wonderful. So this is a real thrill to be able to share this project with you all, and in conversation of the larger um, ethos and mission of this weekend, which is thinking about how arts and more specifically performing arts can incite, hold space, provoke, and inspire change, social change, community-driven change, collaborative change. I wanted to share a bit about a project that I started with a cooperative that I have based in New York City. We are predominantly based in Brooklyn, and as such, a lot of our projects are centered around our collaboration, our relationships, our sense of accountability to our neighbors, both in terms of other grassroots nonprofits and arts organizations, but also the actual local demographic of the communities that we create within, and also hopefully contributing with and for. Final notice. Although it sounds grim, we decided to go with this title because for us, this does speak to a very significant critical urgency that as we continue to move forward in time, we know and understand and are witnessing in this present moment the implications of climate change. The Final Notice is a three-part project that I'm going to speak with and through over the course of this presentation. But my excitement about sharing this particular project is that it does have a strong pedagogical component. It was born out of a STEAM curriculum for youth ranges ages 11 to 22. And it's also inspired my own pedagogy working within the university system. I'm currently based at Cornell University, but while creating this particular program, or at least the legs of it, I was at NYU and also working with CUNY, and it's the project, all right, as much of us who are arts educators know and live, our professional work seeps into our pedagogical work and vice versa. And so I don't really see how they could be separate in this conversation. So I'm also excited to talk about pedagogy as well. Okay, so before moving into it, I just wanted to go ahead from the get-go and just share our cooperative hash. Well, it's not a hashtag, it's a handle, right, for Instagram, but even more significantly, I want to draw attention and give a moment to acknowledge Karen Blondell, who is a community activist based in Red Hook, who is doing tremendous work, has done tremendous work to galvanize change, to be a voice for the local population of individuals who are significantly impacted by climate change and the benign neglect of New York City City Council as a result of such. And she was really a mentor in this project and continues to be a guiding force and voice in this project. So, before we get into the project, I just want to talk about the ethos that is really driving the body of work that my collective does, but also the course curricula that is born out of this particular ethos as well. So, how is a performing body a site of power, resistance, solidarity? How is performance a method of protest, social reparation, cause of effective change? How can performance heal a space of community? How can it remember, restore, and inform? And then going even deeper, what is the history of this place, recent, past, and future, its inhabitants, and again, delving deeply into futurism and what we want, seek, and demand of said futures. And so thinking about building out pedagogy, both for this particular STEAM curriculum as well as some of the university curricula that I was referring to, um, having modular research and applied practice and cause and effect. So oftentimes starting starting with some of the university curricula work, as well as working with some of our youth collaborators in the community, asking them to unpack their own ethos, asking them to sit down and to name the core values, to name the actual causes, the social causes, if you will, that they see themselves reflected in, that they again see themselves identified with and by and for, that they see themselves inspired and motivated to continue to work and live and through, and as such, naming the desired effect, what they seek to bring into the world, to change in the world, to deepen within the world. And then from there, what are they already doing? What do they wish to do in their futures? And then how is their art making a part of that? And then from there we name their demands, their desires, their declarations, and we build individual manifestos. And then collectively, we identify ourselves within each other and build a communal manifesto. And then out of that, talking about movement. What is a movement that can manifest in manifesto, both in the quote unquote abstract, if you will, but also in just the existing living movement of our everyday. And in doing so, trying to break down, trying to demystify, if you will, for lack of a better word, of what quote unquote dance and performance is. And this sort of, again, the word choreography, trying to kind of, again, uh, break that down, shatter any preconceptions that they might have that might feel as though choreography is an exclusive practice, and it's not. It's just simply the art of organization, the art of planning, and even more so, just the art of planning movement. And so, as such, performance just being about reaction, motivation, response, relationship. Execution of this action. How do we map this out? How do we mobilize one another? How do we inspire one another? How do we educate one another? And then doing that, how do we share it? How do we share it? How do we produce it? How do we engage a public audience, if you will? And that in of itself, that is the movement, right? And so for this particular project, as well as for a couple of courses that I teach, including performance as protest, as well as choreography for sites specific to immersive dance theater, we delve deeply into mutual aid. And what does that mean in terms of, it's the practice of voluntary reciprocal exchange, resources, resource sharing, services, etc., for mutual communal collective benefit. But then how can we, again, take that from the framework of social activist practices and also draw the relationships between other art making practices because they are non-exclusive. Community mobilization, so the process of preparing, right? Said resources and also the community in and of itself towards said action, and that you need community mobilization before you get to community organization, right? And so the organization being the actual choreography, if you will, the cooperative efforts, the campaigning by a community for the community within the community at times. And then this setting us up for place-specific, site-specific art making. So thinking about what do I want to say? Why do I want to say this? And therefore, where should this be said? Where am I, so to speak, standing already? And how is this already a stage? And how can it continue to evolve to be further invitational, inclusive, embracing for others to also engage within this stage? Or how can my art making, my performance making enliven this particular place, commemorate, honor, gather, protect, heal, etc. And really thinking about particularly movement making practices in relationship with landscape, with geography, not just in terms of the logistics, but also in terms of the context. And then with that, the concept interrelated with the actual concept towards this particular project. So Final Notice being a case study for that. Final Notice at its heart was a youth-led project in archival action practices, specifically using, again, this sort of, I'm going to talk a little bit more about it in a moment, but action research methodology. And we broke it down in three parts. And I'm going to admit that these three parts were not necessarily our starting point because COVID happened. And when COVID happened, it, in many ways, like with everyone else, it kind of threw us off course, but in many ways, it deepened our course. It really held us accountable to why we were going on said courses and the ways in which we could expand our course in such a way that it could be more inclusive, more accessible. It could be also really truly embedded in a deeper, more expansive community. And then also the ways in which we could also rethink, reconsider, and also re-implement choreography in and of itself. So we started off with the STEAM curriculum, first and foremost and always. The STEAM curriculum, again, science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics in collaboration with two tremendous existing community centers, Red Hook Initiative and El Puente. Red Hook being based in the neighborhood of Red Hook and also El Puente being based in Southside Williamsburg. Um, we had always had the intention of a live performance series being a performative cooperative of, well, I should say performance, interdisciplinary performance arts, right? Um, and the idea would be that we would be working hand in hand with the youth leaders at these two community centers to draw, build, and really galvanize awareness and community action around the effects of climate change in these two particular neighborhoods that were very and still continue to be extremely vulnerable to the effects of climate change. And again, the city's benign neglect to respond to said climate change. We wanted to highlight, expose, and again, galvanize action for change around climate change. And with that, the environmental racism and the historical erasure on these areas of the Brooklyn waterfront. And as such, we saw this as a durational traveling performance series that would mark these particular areas already subject to the effects of climate change. Then COVID happened. And so we had already kind of had like a little bit of a seed of an idea of creating a mobile map app that could be activated by the live performance using some geofencing technology. And then when COVID happened, we just leaned in and we thought about how we could create an interactive map app that could be free, that could be available in multiple languages, and that could also be activated remotely in such a way that users could explore these neighborhoods, learn about these neighborhoods, and in doing so, we expanded our map by 5 map levels, which I'll get into in a moment, our layers, and understand the multidimensional urgency of holding the city accountable to creating policy change. Also, it would allow users who wanted to participate in the live performance series, which took place eventually in 2021 with Climate Week NYC, the ability to also have the agency, the protective agency, to follow the performance with a sense of, again, self-curation, safety of distance, proximity, and also taking the time to explore particular areas of our map as there was a tremendous amount of content. Our manifesto, one, to mobilize users to join community organizing efforts, as there were many and continue to be a growing tree, if you will, of efforts, really working in particular areas, but with a strong connective tissue. And in doing so, to work together to help one another to offer accessible solutions across the board. Secondly, to invest in local BIPOC teen leadership through paid career exploration in the arts, technology, conservation, environmentalism, and health equity. This was incredibly important. All of our youth leaders who participated in this particular project were paid equal to all the professional artists, technologists, and also organizers and producers of this event, in addition to their pay from the community centers. They were our peers, and we learned from them. To contribute to the connective tissue, again, between neighborhood residents and existing nonprofits, and creating a bit of a platform, if you will, that you could tap in either on your computer or on your phone and find resources available to you, quite literally mapped out in your neighborhood. And what we do is we also partnered with organizations who are offering COVID relief supplies at the same time. And then building out to contribute to the Interborough Coalition to support Brooklynites experiencing ongoing structural and environmental racism. Brooklyn is a massive, massive borough, and it is becoming more and more divided by class, by race, by just, again, the historic marginalization in terms of just even social services and resources provided to the city. And so holding one another accountable to really work together to ensure that residents across the borough have agency and equal and equitable opportunities to protect themselves and their families. And again, to provoke local policy change. Okay. By centering and amplifying the voices of local youth and community allies, we reimagine archive as a collaboratively generated living record where science, history, personal storytelling, and activism meet. Right. So really thinking about what is archive and how can also the moving body be an archive in and of itself. So kind of diving into archival activism, we kind of kicked off our pedagogy in such a way that we wanted to open up this question to our participants, both the professional artists as well as the youth leaders, to think about, yeah, what are the gaps of quote unquote traditional archives that have, again, put these particular stories or not on the record, and how can and what can and who can do the work to repair such archival? What do we want the archival to be of said neighborhoods? What do we want the archival to be of your personal individual experience, both past, present, and your desired future? So thinking about ways to respond to what was happening socially and politically at that moment, and also finding mediums, materials, and new and imaginative ways to, again, author these experiences and put them on the record, because at the heart, we're pushing against erasure. Thinking about performers and artists and technologists as heritage workers concerned in fostering a more democratized and diverse historical collection. And in doing so, thinking about collaboration, that we're stronger together, and how are the ways in which we can form long-lasting, equitable partnerships through these social movements. And so by delving into action research, thinking about, yeah, what are the strategies, the applied practical strategies that we can use in that moment? And again, within the obstacle of also the pandemic at that time, to tackle these very not only real world problems, but local at home problems using participatory, collaborative, and also cyclical ways that continue to accumulate, move forward, and progress. Also taking note of what does and does not work to produce, share, and resource share this knowledge, this information, these materials, and this action. So thinking about this as experiential learning, which we as movers, dancers, theater folks, we know the power of embodied research and also practical applied practice learning. But this became ever more apparent to us as we were working with a youth population, even more especially during the pandemic, that had a bit of a disassociation, a disconnect with their own embodiment. And what are ways, and even in working in this particular framework, right, like through the screen, that we can stay embodied, we can stay responsive to our own body and still relate to one another in body, finding ways to activate movement, right? And in a moment where also public space was a scary space, particularly in a place such as New York City during the pandemic, while also honoring our health, honoring what is needed at that moment in time, and to think about, again, what is that future that we want to build together to be practical, participative, collaborative, embodied, emancipatory, interpretive, and critical. So kind of going off of Kurt Lewin's action research spiral of 1946, we kind of structured our final note of STEAM collaboratory in terms of planning the change, right? Keeping in mind that this is going to be fluid and flexible throughout. Finding ways to implement the change incrementally throughout time, observing the process of this implementation, the consequences, what works, what doesn't work, what could we do differently, how can we continue to listen to one another and respond to one another, and how can we continue to reflect, replan, repeat, keep doing, right? Even though this project kind of came to a large kind of climactic moment in 2021, it's ongoing, right? Unfortunately, these conversations have not necessarily found a resolution as of yet. And so again, continuing the momentum. So for final notice, that kind of climactic build was a 2.5 year collaboration. As I mentioned, with my cooperative, we're not only dancers and theater folks, we're digital technologists, we're costume designers, we're makeup designers, we're scenic designers, and we're also writers. And so this project became actually a way of really building in a lot of our own writing practices, particularly with the production of the app. And then we pulled together and we built our faculty with 50 plus community allies and partners throughout Brooklyn. So Brooklyn Public Library, New York Public Library. We worked with Resilient Red Hook. We worked with Blue City in Red Hook. We worked with Newtown Creek. We worked with some authors such as Hugh Ryan of the recent book When Brooklyn Was Queer. We pulled in folks who worked in environmentalism, conservation, who worked in city council, who worked in archival, and who also were grassroots activists. And they led their modules. They worked intimately with the youth leaders to give a glimpse of their kind of perspective on this same, again, this sort of same mission per se, and their approach, their contribution to how to grapple with these very conversations. And it allowed for our youth leaders to also have an opportunity to dive in, to have an immersion in these different types of working, of different professional practices, particularly for those who are about to kind of head into a moment of applying for, to universities and colleges, and to see like how they might want to go into this next phase of their own education. Over this 2.5 year period, we had about 60 youth leaders, 11 to 22, both based at a Red Hook initiative in El Puente. We had relationships and also support from S.T.E.A.M, as well as the Freedom School of the Children's Defense Fund, which also has a home base at Red Hook Initiative, to also make sure that our youth leaders were equally and fairly paid. Again, I'm here speaking right now today, but I am just one of many individuals who was a part of this experience. Yes, I was one of the leaders and directors of the project, but my role was to facilitate more often than not. My role was to listen, and my role was to make sure that I was maintaining a platform, and also, again, one could say choreographing these relationships and the curriculum in and of itself. So this is the team list from September 2021. It has since grown out, but without these particular individuals, the project would not have happened. El Puente, I'll share these slides with Missy at the conclusion of my presentation. But El Puente, it's, if you're not familiar with El Puente, if you're not following El Puente, please hold space for this organization. They are tremendous. They have been doing incredible, important, vital work in Southside for a number of years, a number of decades. They are home to the Global Justice Institute for New York City. They founded the Green Light District, and they have been also a place for free, accessible art and art making practices for local youth for several decades under their Arts for Social Change model. Also, El Puente, meaning bridge, they're based right off of the Williamsburg Bridge. And as such, they're also doing incredible, vital work, leading the work and the research in terms of air pollution in New York City. And unfortunately, in this particular area wrapped around by the BQE and the Williamsburg Bridge is the highest density of particulate in the air, and therefore the highest rate of asthma in New York City. And when you pair that with COVID, doing this partnership at that time was quite sobering and also quite urgent. Red Hook Initiative, based in Red Hook, also has been around for a number of years, doing tremendous work, being a home for local youth, using PAR research, participatory action research models, and again, a home for the Freedom School for the Children's Defense Fund for a number of years and running throughout the summers. Here we have some of our participants at El Puente in the summer of 2021. We have JD, we have Billie Jean, we have Yasetti, we have Kimberly. I'm looking through right here. Oh my goodness. We have Yasetti, we have Ashley, we have Leslie, and you'll see myself and my collaborator, Antoine Byers here. We spent 5 days a week working with this tremendous cohort, building not only the map app, but also a new Dancing for Social Change curriculum at El Puente, in which then the youth leaders created site-specific dances on the actual sites that they had delved into for their research for the app. Our partners, our community partners, range from both arts organizations, as well as some nonprofit organizations, private organizations, and community-based organizations as well. And this was really a village effort. So we started in 2029 building out our S.T.E.A.M curriculum. By 2021, we were online at Red Hook, and 2021 we were on the ground, as you can see here, at both Red Hook Initiative as well as El Puente, working outside as we were still in a pretty precarious moment, particularly in New York, but also trying to get back into our bodies, back on site, and also cultivating energy, a sense of optimism, and also a sense of still continued social, a demand for social change, as per their project. So how did we do this? What was the actual breakdown of processing of materials? So as we're gathering research, archival materials, both formal and informal archival materials, also generating, collecting oral histories, both amongst themselves, of families, and then partnering with some local senior centers, we started to just gather, gather, gather. Then we started to write out, um, you know, content that we felt could very succinctly, very directly, and very strongly put on the record these particular histories across the neighborhoods. And in doing so, we started to organize ways in which this could be shared on an app, right? And so we asked the youth leaders, well, what are the apps that you like the most? Why do you think as such? What's effective? What's ineffective? How would you want this to be presented on your own phones to communicate the information that you have just deemed to be important? So we started to do some work in terms of just, well, let's build the actual wireframe first and foremost. What do you want it to look like? They chose the icons, right? What icons best symbolize your research topic? So you'll see here, we have, our contaminated sites. We've got our take action. We have our unmarked histories, right? So that which has not gone on the formal record that needs to be on the formal record. We have our historical landmarks, and then we also have our climate change. What colors most accurately reflect these topics and their urgencies? And so we got into color theory. We started thinking about, well, what color moves you? What ignites? What do you feel within your own bodies? Your visceral response, if you will. We talked about features and buttons that were most engaging, most intuitive, and then thinking about accessibility and how to make it most accessible. I do need to give credit to Henry Holmes, who was a project lead on this particular component of the project alongside of Stuart Lynn. And again, working very intimately with the youth leaders, they built out a tremendous map app that you can find, you can locate on your own phone, also on any internet connection. You can use your laptop, you can use your tablet, etc. Currently, it is available in both Spanish and English, and we're still working it out. But the idea is that you could click, and I go back for a moment, you can click on any of these particular icons. And in doing so, you'll see that there are multiple layers, right? Multiple map layers at one site. And the intersection, the entanglement of those map layers is what led us to, again, delving into the community-driven reasoning and storytelling, looking at this map and what we wanted to affect in terms of that particular futurism. So at that time, Hurricane Sandy, Superstorm Sandy, which, as we know, with 13 feet of water in Red Hook in and of itself. Red Hook as an entire neighborhood is a flood zone. But as you I'm sure is coming into your news feeds, flooding in New York City has becoming more and more dangerous, more and more extreme. And also there are very few safeguards put into place across all neighborhoods, to be quite frank, with the exception of the financial district. So we started thinking about, well, why, why are we, aside from the benign neglect of the city in these particular neighborhoods, the presence of Superfund and brownfield sites, both in Red Hook as well as in uh, South Side, is also what links our stories together. So when we think about Superfund and brownfield sites, we're talking about legacy pollution. Why? Because these were very much, we're talking about industrial districts, past and present. And as such, we're talking about contaminants having been left in the soil, having been dumped in the water, and then also not having had any rehabilitation until there's vital necessity in terms of the explosion of a public health crisis, Or we start to see, I wouldn't call it vital necessity, but we start to see once a developer wants to break ground, they have to make sure that the soil is actually at standard levels. So Superfund and brownfield sites are quite excessive when we look at the Brooklyn waterfront area. Oil, ink, mercury dumping for decades and decades on end. As we know, with climate change and the rising water levels, we start to see, and then with flooding taking place as well, these contaminants not only making their way to the surface, but also being carried inland, right? And so this compounded with COVID, right? Because once those contaminants make their way to the top of the soil, right, they make their way up into the air, we start to see, again, neighborhoods that are already extremely vulnerable to air pollution also becoming extremely vulnerable to the said contamination in the air, as well as also COVID-19. So you'll see at the bottom, I put contextual research, landscape mapping, etc. These are components that are also modules in some of my university curriculum. So thinking about the why, the history, past, recent, of these particular sites. What do we need to know? How do we have to hold ourselves accountable to truly understanding where we are standing, as well as also mapping out the logistics of the area and having understanding of the practicality of where we are. So Red Hook Initiative and El Puente are community centers that are adjacent to also not only a Superfund but brownfield sites in both neighborhoods. They have been working for years already to program um, community mobilization efforts, not only in their neighborhoods, but also surrounding neighborhoods such as Gowanus and Greenpoint, et cetera. They are storm surge zones, right? And I think it's most important to acknowledge that not only that, but these particular neighborhoods are also home to minority, low income, and immigrant communities who are caught living in a paradox of extreme invisibility and visibility. Under governing agencies. Studies have shown that Black and Latinx neighborhoods in Kings County, Brooklyn, are at a 65% higher probability to experience extreme weather patterns, events, and air pollution caused by climate change. And at the same time, they are subjected to slow and or absent response from the city and are inundated with immediate threats such as ICE raids, which has only increased in the last week, deportation, and police misconduct. And then we also have gentrification, right? The paradox of gentrification, corporate real estate development entangled with local politics, leading to hypergentrification, rent increase, and causing rapid extreme displacement, right? So this is another layer on top of the Superfund and brownfield site environmental component, our map layers, right? And so this now brings into the research safety and risk management, public engagement, again, and deepening our contextual research and understanding. So for an example, Todd Shipyard, right? Todd Shipyard is at the very southern basin of the neighborhood of Red Hook. Todd Shipyard for many years was the largest um, uh, dock repair site on the Brooklyn waterfront, then eventually in all of New York City. And at one time, up until about right until the end of World War II, the largest in the nation. Um, it made the Brooklyn waterfront a very trafficked area in ways that brought a tremendous amount of commerce, but also that being said, we're talking about a history that is also very much entangled with history of slavery, particularly uh, when we're talking about, you know, the map following the mappings, if you will, of colonialism tied into American capitalization. We see this being a vital part of our understanding, our contextual research. As we move into the Second World War and beyond, though, we also see an interesting layer of queer life, of queer community, of the shipyards, particularly that of the Todd shipyard, being a safe space, particularly for a lesbian community to emerge, a place where women, female femme represent identifying individuals could participate and be paid equally to male presenting counterparts, and building a community that flourished in many ways. Here we have Anne Mosley, who is part of the Welderettes, a community at Todd Shipyard, that again created a very vibrant space for queer expression as well as for art making. Um, Todd Shipyard was an extreme brownfield site for a number of years, completely neglected by the city. It had tremendous amount of mercury in the soil, as well as other carcinogenic materials. Was not touched by the city for any remediation, nor touched by state nor federal levels of remediation and rehabilitation until IKEA. So Todd Shipyard is no longer. It was filled in, and on top we have New York City's chapter, if you will, of IKEA at the historic site. It was also supposed to be marked a historic site by the local historic registrar, but the developer and IKEA did not want to wait. Just adjacent to IKEA, you also have the Gowanus Canal. The Gowanus Canal, as we know, is and continues to be a Superfund site. It's going to take hundreds of millions of dollars to remediate decades of oil, mercury dumping, chemical dumping, sewage dumping, the combination of which creates, one could say, this really kind of fantastical reflective design that sits on the top of its the water layer, but that is in fact just highly toxic material. It's been renamed Lavender Lake for its kind of purplish hue, but again, will take a tremendous amount of rehabilitation and repair. So what we've done is we've created these layers, Todd Shipyard, our unmarked histories, right? Our contaminated history, past and somewhat recent and present when we think about our relationship to the Gowanus Canal. And we're trying to show the entanglement of such. Similarly speaking, we have our indigenous history, the Lenape-Hoking. More specifically, in this particular region, we have the Canarsie, which was a subpopulation of the Lenape that lived its summer seasons in the area that we now call Red Hook. At that time, it was called Saint-Cyr. It was a marshland. It was very plush. It was an important also place to also really cultivate the water and the water landscape at that time, and also utilizing said waterways for agriculture at that time. It was overtaken by the Dutch. Shortly after, mills popped up. Shortly after, we have what we still have to be the problem of the Gowanus Canal. Then we have Tin City. Tin City, kind of during the early to mid-century, when we start to see Hoovervilles, right? Areas of a lot of displaced, oftentimes immigrant, oftentimes freed individuals, trying to find a place, a safe haven, a home, finding their way in these, again, shelters of houseless individuals and communities. Tin City was one of the largest Hoovervilles in New York City, and then it was pushed out by Robert Moses and the Red Hook houses. The Red Hook houses was first pitched to be a luxury housing complex for New York City. It was the largest housing complex, public housing complex in New York City at that time, remains one of the largest at the time. Since it has been predominantly inhabited by Black and Brown families, it has been tremendously neglected, under-resourced, and has created also, at times, a very dangerous and unhealthy landscape. When we saw with Superstorm Sandy, 60% of inhabitants reported mold. Many of those residents still have not had any remediation or rehabilitation in their housing complex. Here we have the nearby soccer fields. You'll see here there was right before COVID a plan to remediate the lead in the soil. They started to dig up, and then once COVID hit, they stopped. You'll see that the overgrown the overgrown fields. But this being really one of the only kind of safe walking areas to get exercise at that time. And again, not only are you trying to block out COVID, but you're also wearing a mask to protect yourself from the lead in the air. They were also pulling up all of the trees around the Red Hook houses at that time prior to COVID. COVID hits. the city just sort of evacuated and vacated their project, leaving, um, 15 to 20 feet of soil, lead soil, if you will, or leaden soil. Uh, just they put down like a plastic sheath. This is the result of a couple of years of, again, this was like 2021. So again, we're like the third story up, you're sort of breathing it in, creating a tremendous amount of hazard. Okay, so I want to end things with, um, I'm just checking the time for a moment. I know I only have a few more moments, so I'm going to go kind of quickly. Now, how does this all kind of culminate into uh, our dance performance project or durational project? Well, I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to play this. I'm going to talk over it. So we did two traveling dances that took place during Climate Week NYC. It was September of 2021. And we started at the waterfront, both in Southside as well as in Red Hook. You'll see here, this is near, um, uh, we're actually just south of Todd Shipyard in this particular location. And what we did was it was a 1.5 mile traveling dance per site in which we physically marked the floodplain to the edge of what had at that time been the floodplain. In both cases, it was the expressways. In doing so, we took the materials, the research content, the voices, the feedback of our youth leaders, and we built cyclical dances based on heat, air, and water, based on the data and mathematical kind of formulas that we could use to implement said data into to create repetitions that would accelerate, that would create high stamina phrases that could also locationally mark the very sites that we researched. So we would essentially lead a public audience site to site. In doing so, we also handed out QR code cards that would freely, again, kind of activate users' phones, individuals' phones, if they wanted to experience in said way. Headphones would be activated with oral histories and also just spoken histories, images, statistics, graphs, maps, archival information that we had permission to use would also be activated. So you could be kind of fully immersed in information and hopefully a felt empathy, if you will, in terms of trying to understand what was happening or what had happened and what could happen at these different sites. We utilize recyclable materials, even the materials that you see here with the costumes created by Jenny Lay. These are recycled materials because orange as a dye is not very eco-friendly. So we wanted to make sure that we were still being eco-conscious. The orange was chosen by the youth leaders to echo the living history map layer. Um, and what we did is we created a pilgrimage from the waterline to the end of the flood line. And in doing so, we had a couple of accessible sites where we stayed for a certain amount of time for individuals who wanted to sit or kind of have alternative ways of viewing as opposed to walking. Those maps and those timings were sent out in advance for individuals who wanted to meet us at said sites, or also it was really about engaging with the passerby, the incidental audience as well. And then we continued on. And so if you were to choose to, or not only walk with us, or just to witness us walking, the time that it took, the exhaustion that it took was intentional. The exhaustion of this very cause, the fact that no change has been happening, that so many community members, organizations, even politicians are working to trying to create a voice, a change, an understanding, doing something that could create practical change, and that we're hitting these walls. We wanted to have that be translatable through our performance. The actual performance of itself was about 90 minutes. The dancers chose to go consistently throughout. That was their choice. We had a conversation around consent. They had a doula. Each performer had a doula. Performers being Jason Collins, Christine Flores, Antoine Bayer, and Vanessa Vargas. That doula was assigned to each performer per performance. And what they did is that they followed the performer, they had their water, they had snacks, they had anything that the performer wanted them to have, and the performer had the agency to stop at any point that they wanted to. And we had kind of mapped out places where we would kind of loop in and loop out. Jenny Lay created the costumes. They were, as you can tell, inspired by hazmat suits, which was a conversation we had before COVID, and then COVID happened, and that created a whole nother layer of context, of relationship, of vulnerability. There were slits in the hazmat suits to also kind of expose the body, and that was intentional as well. And then we wore latex gloves. Many of us at that time, all four of us, or five of us rather, in the dance team component of this production lived in the city throughout COVID and expressed our fears, and that many of us had strategically worn layers of latex gloves early on in the pandemic when we had to leave the house, and we would shed a layer of a glove after a particular chore. And just to make sure that we were not cross-contaminating. And so at particular sites, they would shed a layer of a glove and dispose of them in trash bins, of course. But this idea of also leaving trace. And then again, Jenny used recyclable fabrics. We also partnered with Airbirds to have eco-friendly, eco-conscious footwear that could also be protective of their dancing. The performance route had to be safe. We had to clean it the best we could. We had to scout it before every performance. We had to get permits and permissions from New York City Parks and Rec, POPs, open streets, and also some private entities as well. We had to make choices around our route in terms of making sure that whatever block we were on, it aligned with our core values. And we also wanted to make sure that our performers felt heard, supported, that they led the charge, they led the voice in doing so. One more component that I do want to mention, here are our maps of accessible locations for rest, pause, intersection. I want to mention, as you can see, Vanessa wore a GoPro unit, and we were actively recording and live streaming remotely through her movement. And the idea is like, okay, well, then aside from galvanizing awareness and trying to just build some conversation, like what is the dance actually also doing? And we were like, well, let's create an archival. So we recorded the performance through her GoPro. And in doing so, trying to shed different perspectives on the actual landscape, community moment, right, of these particular places that are very much endangered. Um, This is in Southside Williamsburg. This was September 25th, 2021. Coincidentally, this was not intentional, but coincidentally, uh, that same weekend, Netflix debuted Squid Games. And so we were stopped multiple times by passerbys thinking that we were some sort of promotional event for Squid Games, which we were not, of course, but it coincidentally opened up a conversation for us to actually, I think, build even more of an audience through just curiosity of having some sort of relationship. And it made us think a lot about like abstraction and to what degree we abstract some of our production elements, if you will, our materials, our aesthetics in the future, or what are ways in which like we can just further tap in. I know we're coming up close on time,
We're
so I'd
actually a
like to
bit
just open.
past time, unfortunately.
Oh,
Um,
sorry.
but it's okay. Danielle, this work is incredible and
Oh,
so
thank you.
complex and so uh like laborious, right? I mean, it's
It's a
just the
lot.
layers are unbelievable. So please, if you would share your contact information in the chat, if
Absolutely.
people want to find out more and ask questions. And this is really amazing work. Thank you so much for sharing.